Welcome, everyone. We'll get started shortly. Thanks for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Before we get started, of course, we want to say that, thanks to CalFresh Healthy Living for funding this training. This material was funded by the USDA's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. All right, so let's just dive right into it, right? So we have a lot to talk about. We have 3 sessions to get through in this NPP for Implementers training. So big picture, what are we going to be doing? Today's session is all about taking that trauma-informed approach, understanding it, getting that foundational knowledge about what that means and how that impacts our communities, and then starting by applying it to ourselves. Now, day 2 is where we really dive into what is the nutrition pantry program. Let's make sure we all understand the process of it, the technical assistance that's needed, the training, the resources, all that good stuff. So that will be more session 2 and 3. Today is really the building blocks of this TI approach, which does certainly inform how you approach the nutrition pantry program. So like I said, day 1 is more of a TI approach. Day 2, we're going to talk about recruiting or working with your sites, the NPP process, and all the great tools we have, because we really have so many. Day 3, we're actually going to use a couple of case studies to really apply everything you learned in the training and in the online course and make sure that it makes sense and that you feel comfortable taking this program out into your communities as well. Little bit of housekeeping. So we're using some different forms of interaction today. We'll have Mentimeter. We will also be having breakout rooms. So I just wanted to inform you that right now. If you have a computer where, sometimes we have folks where they're like, my mic just doesn't work, and you can always use the chat box, of course. But if for some reason you would feel more comfortable not joining a breakout room, just go ahead and send a direct message to let me say Colby. I think she might be your best person for that. Unmuting, I see so many cameras on, but feel free to unmute. This is really a conversation. It's still a pretty small group today. You can use the raise hand feature. You can unmute. You can ask chat box questions. We really encourage and welcome all forms of interaction and collaboration. We are talking about adverse childhood experiences. We're talking about, stress, and sometimes having these conversations. It's a little bit surprising, but it can bring up some emotions sometimes when you're just having these conversations. So take care of yourself. Do whatever is needed for you to, be your best self today. We are recording this. We will be posting the recording in the online course. So that's where this recording is going to be going. One other thing that I like to add to housekeeping is just a little bit of language level setting as well. So in general, we refer to our community members who are receiving goods and services out of food distribution as our neighbors. That is pretty much the norm in the region where we're at. Some people use that as well. Others may say clients, participants, students, depending on your population. So just know that you'll hear us say neighbors most often, and we're just talking about, our food distribution participants. Okay, so a really quick about me. Oh, go ahead. Is there anyone who wanted to? Okay, I think we're good. I think someone might just be unmuted. A very quick about me. So welcome to today's training and hello, my name is Leah Quinn. I am a senior program manager at Leah's Pantry. I've been with Leah's Pantry since 2020, so going on 6 years now. And I have a professional background in nonprofit work, community building, food security, food banking. I have a daughter. I live on a sailboat with my husband out here in sunny San Diego, and it is a really lovely sunny fall day today. I love this work. I love talking about a trauma-informed approach. I really feel, having worked basically my entire career in some form of nonprofit, that it really addresses a lot of the gaps that I've seen. So I hope you all are excited to learn more today as well. And let me get to the next slide, and then I'll pass it over to Colby for her introduction.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colby D'Onofrio. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based out here in the Bay Area of California. I come from a nutrition science and food banking background, and I've been with Leah's Pantry for about 3.5 years now. I'm a training specialist on our food security team. Some fun facts about me when I'm not in the office. I can usually be found at home with my orange tabby cat named Persia, or in the gym. I'm a very avid lifter, and I do a lot of travel with both my sister, who you can see in the center there in that middle photo, and my fiance, who you can see on the left. I've had the privilege of going to Kenya a few years ago, and then most recently I was in Thailand. And I will pass it over to Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy. I'm a senior project coordinator with Leah's Pantry on the products and marketing team. I have a background as a dietitian, working specifically with people that have diabetes and other things like that. And I moved here from New Jersey to San Diego to escape the long, harsh winters. And like some fun facts about me, love to travel, love to eat, and spend time with my Chihuahua rat terrier that you can see in here. Yeah.
Thanks, Colby. Thanks, Amy. So we will be your facilitators, your guides, your collaborators now through the rest of this training, and then after you're trained as well. So we look forward to getting to know a lot of you better, and I see a couple of familiar faces here today as well. So say one last thing before I'll pass it over to Amy, which is that we are talking about taking a trauma-informed approach today. We're going to be talking about um, uh, cognitive science and resilience and really interesting things and how that all relates to nutrition and food and our relationships with food. But we like to remind people that this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation. We're not even going to be going into all the different trauma informed principles or anything like that. So, what we're really going to try and leave you with is more the essence of a trauma informed approach. So, keep that in mind. Um, and just keep in mind that this is really a journey. There's no checklist that you can take to be like, great, trauma informed, check, moving on, took care of that. It's really just the tip of an iceberg, a very interesting iceberg. We do a lot of other trainings where we do go into this trauma informed approach and principles in a lot more detail. So if that's something that interests you, we'll also have optional resources in the online course when you're all done with this training that you can check out and see and learn more about some different things that you can study on your own as well. Okay, perfect. Well, with that, I'll pass it over to Amy, and she's going to take us through that meaning of food and life question.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. I'm going to take us through, like Leah said, the meaning of food in life. So, hopefully, you all had a chance to complete the questionnaire that was in the online course. The purpose of this questionnaire is to learn more about how food fits into different parts of our lives. So, you'll notice in this image that there are 5 domains that demonstrate the way we create meaning and value around food. The first one that we have is aesthetic. So, this refers to the way food looks, how it's presented and displayed. And then we have social, which touches on how food might connect you to your culture or community. And then we have the health domain, which represents nourishing the body and mind with food. And we have sacred, which represents how food feeds the soul, which can be connected to religion or other cultural traditions. And lastly, we have moral domain, which represents the greater impact that your food choices might have on other people or the environment. These are some concepts that you might not have considered previously. So, hopefully, after this discussion, you'll walk away with a better understanding of food's role in your life. You might be wondering why this exploration of the meaning of food in our lives is important or relevant to today's topic. But when we consider our relationship to food in so many different ways, it's easy to see how our food habits and cultural traditions are very connected to all aspects of our life. So, food is not just something that we eat for our health or something that keeps our bellies full. It actually has a lot of meaning, and the meaning takes many forms across individuals, communities, and cultures, and may change a lot throughout our lives as well. So many times when we are working on projects that aim to increase food security or increase healthy diets, we forget how connected food is to all parts of our life. So if you took this survey online, then you might already know whether you scored high on social, for example, or a different area like moral. But now I want to actually take a minute to think about what has shaped your relationship with food over the course of your life. What kind of things happened in your life that resulted in this relationship? Think about how you learn to eat and cook, what you eat now, how you shop, who you eat with, and how you prepare food. Is food a meaningful part of your day or just something that needs to happen, but you don't really give it that much thought? So there's no wrong answers here. The goal is just to do some self-reflection. And we do have a Mentimeter. So if you can go to mentimeter.com and put in that code, or you can scan the QR code with your phone. Connecting with others through food, definitely. Yeah, for me, food is definitely a social aspect. Yeah, socially connecting with meals at friends' houses. Social is very important. Also consider family meals in this domain, building a strong family foundation by connecting for at least one meal a day. Teaching others about my culture and cultural foods. Yes, absolutely. I grew up playing sports, so nourishing my body was a priority for performance as well as being a Polynesian dancer. These show up in my personal life with my culture and using food as a way to gather together and connect, cooking with family during the holidays and making memories over special family recipes and family dinners. I feel like we all have that social domain. Um, yeah, food is about, other people and eating together. Thank you everybody for sharing. Oh, we have some in the chat too. It shows up in my personal life while raising my children to eat and be healthy. Yes, definitely. So it's the health and social domain there. I love hosting meals and it's important for me to make healthy but beautiful meals. Okay, so we have some aesthetic in there too. Even little things like doing plant-based every once in a while or showing people new recipes. So that kind of hits on a lot of different ones, moral, aesthetic, social. Health is my main priority in this stage of my life. Yeah. And that's a good point too. It can really change based on what stage of life you're in too. Food is life, to share, to serve, to feed. Yes. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. Okay, so at Leah's Pantry, we argue that cultivating a multi-dimensional relationship with food can be protective, healing, and actually drive positive, flexible, and sustainable and health-promoting behaviors. So we want to push against the idea that for people who are experiencing food insecurity, food is just fuel, calories, and nutrients. Instead, we believe that a rich relationship with food, one that incorporates culture, family, environment, and our appreciation of beauty can provide a pathway for long-term nourishment. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Colby.
So we're going to jump into trauma-informed nutrition security. And this is a big word. It's made of 4 words, so it can feel a little overwhelming. But we are going to dive into what each of these aspects means and how we can apply this approach to the work you're doing in your community and your food programs. So we're going to jump back over to Menti and we're going to start with a real quick question here. So again, you can scan this QR code. You can go to menti.com and enter this code on the screen. Or you can also, I'm going to drop the link in right here in the chat. There we go. Or you can go to the link that is in the chat right now. Our question this time is, how would you define trauma? If you want to use the chat box in Zoom, that is totally fine as well. There's no, we're going to dive into what trauma is. So just when we hear trauma, what comes to mind? Anything that causes distress for a person. Distress is definitely a part of trauma. Significant negative experience with long-lasting impacts. Yeah, that long-lasting impact part is a really key part of trauma. A situation or experience that impacts you negatively, socially, emotionally, physically, and has lasting impacts. Definitely. We'll give it a few more moments here. Emotional distress from life experiences or moments. Life-altering experiences that your body and mind struggles to overcome. I love this part about the body getting involved too, because that is very much a real part of trauma that we're going to dive into today. Something that an individual is unable to integrate the negative consequences of, that inability to cope, right? We get overwhelmed. A negative event or series of events that changes how we move through the world. Yeah, definitely. Something that hits your soul, your psyche, that shoves, which changes your whole being. Yeah, a big impact. Impactful experiences that contribute to the way a person lives, definitely. And in the chat, we have anything that affects your emotional, spiritual, affects you emotionally, spiritually, and the body. And something that something you negatively experience that affects you mentally, emotionally, physically, etc. Great. So I'm loving already that y'all are on this path, this like thought line of that trauma is more than just something that happens in our brains, in our heads. It's something that affects us in our bodies too. It affects the way we interact with the world, and there's long-lasting impacts. So thank you so much for responding to that. Oh, deep-rooted stressors that can last a long time, for sure. So with that, we're going to dive into our definition of trauma here um, at Leah's Pantry. We're also going to explore trauma, like I said, but also adversity and resilience. So, what is trauma, right? We asked that question to y'all. How do we define it here at Leah's Pantry? Well, we like to use the three E's to define trauma. The first E is the event, an event that's scary or difficult or stressful. And this could be a single event, like, a death or a natural disaster, but it could also be a long series of events like poverty or food insecurity. Now, whether an event is actually traumatic depends heavily on how we experience that event. So, the second E there. And that can be really based on our personal life experiences, our environments, our genetics, the social supports around us that enable us to handle or not really handle that event. And together, the event and the experience is going to result in the effect. So it's important to remember that trauma is a neurobiological response, which many of y'all pointed out, meaning it affects our brains, our bodies as well. So when we think about this we have this event, this experience, and this effect. You're like, okay, I might kind of understand that, but what does this look like in practice? How does this look, in someone's life? Let's talk first about the first E, the event. I mentioned that there are events that can happen that are stressful, that are overwhelming, that are scary or really, really difficult. We call these adverse events or adversity. And it's pretty broad, right? As you can see on this slide here, we have a lot of different things that can be considered adverse. We can break them down into the household area for things like domestic violence, homelessness, emotional, sexual, physical, substance abuse. We can also break it down into events that happen in our community. So stepping out a little bit bigger into our greater environment. That can be things like community or neighborhood violence. It could also be just having poverty in our community or lack of social capital and mobility. And then taking it one step further, even zooming out more, we have stressful experiences that can happen in our environment. So this can be things like tornadoes or hurricanes, right? It could be wildfires, or it could be something that's a bit more long lasting, like the effects of the climate crisis. Some of these are what we might call loud traumas, right? So I like to think of a loud trauma as something that if you mentioned this to someone else in our world, their reaction is probably going to be, wow, that's really tough. That's probably going to have a long-lasting impact on you. And those are going to be things like domestic violence, varying types of abuse, natural disasters, community violence, things that the world readily recognizes as difficult and scary and challenging and likely to impact us in a variety of ways. But some of these are also quiet adversities, and those should definitely not be overlooked. Things like structural racism, ongoing poverty, food insecurity. These are things that might not be as prevalent or as readily recognized by our world as having big impacts on us. But the truth is that when we experience these for a long period over time, they can actually be far more impactful than a one-time loud adversity. In a way, it's like our world is not recognizing that that these are challenging, and so society doesn't recognize that the world is not a very welcoming place for us, and that in itself can cause adversity and challenges for us. Now, we are talking about food today, right? It's good to understand the variety of ways in which we can experience adversity and how those can lead to different types of, or how those different types of events can lead to trauma. But we are talking about trauma-informed nutrition security. So, some of these might be obvious the way that they relate to food, right? Things like lack of food security. That's going to have a great impact on our diet and our relationship with food. Some of them, though, like poor water and poor air quality, might not be as obvious. Someone who experiences poor water quality might have to eat into their food budget to purchase water. And while they're purchasing drinks, well, water is kind of boring, but sweetened beverages taste great and they're not that much more expensive. So they might consume a higher amount of sweetened beverages. There's a variety of ways that different types of adversity can interact with our relationship to food, and a lot of those fall under the umbrella of poverty. Poverty itself is an adverse experience, but poverty also encompasses a lot of different quiet adversities, and having these happening concurrently in our lives really starts to weigh on us and makes the world feel like it's not a safe and welcoming place for us. Now, food distributions or community food programs might also inadvertently be places where people experience stress and adversity because remember again, food insecurity itself is an adverse experience and is often experienced among a variety of other adverse experiences and stressors. When someone comes to our food distributions, they might feel a stigma. I think we all know that there's still a stigma associated with needing to access the charitable food system. And this might make neighbors feel shame for needing our services. And that can be really challenging. There also might be a feeling of restriction, right? A food distribution is a place where we do have to maintain order and policy and rules, but these can make people sometimes feel like they are being monitored or it's not an equitable or equal distribution of food. Now, people might especially feel that they're being restricted from accessing everything they need or want, especially if they are experiencing the feast or famine cycle. This is a really interesting, like very, very deep biological urge that goes all the way back to our Neanderthal ancestors. Because our ancestors were hunters and gatherers, and they didn't know when the next hunt was going to be successful or when they were going to get a great bounty of gatherings. So, there's an urge in us to stock up on food when it's available, eat as many calories as we can, gain as much food as we can when it's available, because we don't know when it's going to run out again. In modern day, we're not hunting and gathering, but this urge and this cycle is still very real. So it might look like people taking more than they can use out of food distribution. It might look like them going to multiple different organizations to receive food. And although some of this food ultimately ends up going to waste, this is just this deep urge that people have to stock up on food when it's available, either as calories or just having it around them to create a sense of safety against when it might run out again. Now, finally, neighbors might also feel a sense of cultural oppression if they aren't able to access foods that fit their personal cultural needs or if their preferred language isn't spoken on site. So remember that it's not just the event alone that causes trauma. The experience is also incredibly important. When we talk about the second E, the experience, we're referring to how an individual perceives or processes an event. And how they do this is often related to different resilience factors. So we just talked about a lot of really difficult things, and that's kind of the adverse side of the scale. The good thing is that there is resilience. Resilience is the process of the body and mind adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So, being alive means that we're going to have tough things happen. In fact, it's really important that we have difficult things happen so we can learn how to cope with stressors and with adversity. On the one hand, adverse experiences shape our brains and bodies, but positive experiences help us to develop resilience and also play a crucial role in our well being and ability to thrive. Now, positive experiences can actually serve as a type of protection against the stress and adversity. And they also generally contribute to our ability to flourish mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc. Interestingly enough, there was some research conducted by Dr. Christine Bethel at the Hope Center at Tufts University. And her research showed that individuals who can identify a wide range of positive experiences, even with varying degrees of adverse experiences, tend to actually live longer than those who don't have as many positive experiences. So essentially, when we have positive experiences to help us offset the stress and adversity, we develop resilience, and that actually helps us live longer. Like literally, our lifespan is affected by the balance between positive and adverse experiences. When we think about how we can implement trauma-informed nutrition security approaches into our distributions and our work, it can feel a bit overwhelming, right? Unfortunately, we can't rid the world of stress and adversity and scarcity and trauma, and it can feel really overwhelming to hear about all these terrible things happening in our community. Maybe our neighbors come to us and tell us about the difficult things that are happening in their lives, and we have pretty much no control over the things that happen to them outside of our distribution. But we do have control over what happens inside of our distribution and our food programs. So if we think about those difficult things as rain, as a storm, we can think about offering connection to resources, access to quality nourishment, education and sharing of knowledge, promoting positive relationships, and promoting interconnectedness among community members and community services as an umbrella that we can hold up for our community to shelter them against the rain. Now, finally, let's talk about the effect, right? So the final E is the effect. And we can think about the final E as the event plus how someone experienced it is going to result and really impact the effect that it has on them in the long run. A lot of y'all said in that Mentimeter that trauma has a long-lasting impact, and you're absolutely correct. I love this quote from Gabor Mate that trauma is not what happens to you, right? If we think about what happens to you as the event, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. So we're really thinking about it as trauma is not just something that happens from a one-time event, but the event plus how that person experiences it. And that is heavily impacted by the positive experiences, the support they have around them. That is going to impact whether it really develops into long-lasting trauma. And again, it's something that impacts both our bodies and our brains. So it's not just something that happens in our head. It's not just something that people are making up to be difficult. It really does have very real impacts. And to understand the effect, I like to think about the window of tolerance, which was proposed by Dr. Dan Siegel. So we all have a natural window of tolerance. When we feel like our window is wide, we have the ability to deal with everyday challenges that occur. when we have support in our lives, when we have care from other people, we can widen our window of tolerance, meaning we have a greater ability to cope with and handle difficult and stressful situations. On the other hand, though, experiencing frequent adversity and stress without the positive experiences to offset that, that shrinks our window of tolerance. So, someone who has experienced a lot of adversity and has a smaller window of tolerance may be more easily thrown off balance. They might get pushed out of that window by something seemingly small that someone with a wide window of tolerance would easily be able to cope with and regulate. Someone who has a small window of tolerance might have a difficult time regulating or understanding their emotions. And even after the event has passed, it might take a longer time for them to regulate themselves and get back within their window of tolerance compared to someone who has a wide window. When we think about our window of tolerance, when we're inside of it, we're at our best. It's also known as being it's also known as being in a state of rest and digest. So we're able to use our higher thinking brain. We can be mentally flexible. We can be curious and we can learn new things. We can be creative. We can relate to others. We can regulate ourselves. We can plan for the future and we can effectively problem solve. So these are all things that many of us do on a regular basis. And sometimes we don't realize how great and how what a great opportunity it is to be in this state and use this higher thinking brain. So let's look at an example of someone who has a wide window of tolerance and experiences a moderately adverse, stressful experience, right? So if we think about that event, that adverse event, as that lightning bolt, someone who has a wide window of tolerance, they might start to tend towards fight or flight, which is also called hyperarousal, which is outside of our window of tolerance. Or they might tend down towards the other side outside of their window of tolerance, which is hypoarousal, also known as fawn or freeze. But ultimately, this person with a wide window of tolerance has a lot of room to move and fluctuate while staying within that window of tolerance. So they might tend towards one side or tend towards lower side, but they're able to stay rather regulated. And if they do get pushed out into fight or flight or into fawn or freeze, they can pretty easily regulate and bring themselves back into that window of tolerance. Now, this slide shows the stress response of someone who has a small window of tolerance and may have even experienced so much adversity and stress that it turns into prolonged toxic stress. Their window of tolerance is much smaller than someone who has that wide one. And if we think about this lightning bolt as the same event, right, we can see how their reaction is going to be very different. They bounce quickly up towards fight or flight, then maybe drop down towards fawn or freeze. They might just be constantly bouncing back and forth to the sides outside of their window of tolerance, spending very little time in that regulated state. They might also get stuck on in fight or flight or stuck off, right? So what does that look like? Well, if you're stuck in fight or flight, this might come off as frequent anger, excessive anxiety, chaotic energy, hypervigilance, or hyperactivity. If we get stuck off, it might look like depression or numbness, withdrawal from society, shame and social disconnection, lack of motivation, or apathy. Both of these are really difficult places to be. You're either turned up so high that you can't control your emotions, or you're turned down so low that you can't even turn on your emotions. So someone is going to be more easily pushed out of that window of tolerance and into these emotions when they have that smaller window of tolerance. And remember, that smaller window of tolerance is going to come from experiencing frequent adversity without those positive social factors to protect them and offset that adversity. Remember that we also said, though, trauma happens in the body and the brain. So someone who's stuck in fight or flight might have high blood pressure. They might have chronic pain or sleeplessness. They might have digestive issues or appetite changes. On the other hand, someone who's stuck in fawn or freeze might experience chronic fatigue. They might have really low blood pressure, also have poor digestion or appetite changes. So, recognizing the physical symptoms and the emotional effects that you saw on the previous slide can help us better understand and compassionately reframe behaviors that we might see as challenging or poor health outcomes. And we can see these more as resulting from things that a person cannot easily control because of their past experiences. So we're going to go back to Menti. I know that was a lot of talking, but I want to do a quick reflection because, like I said, we all have our own windows of tolerances. So if you're already still on the Menti from before, I'm going to change it here in just a moment. You can stay right there. If you haven't had a chance to hop on yet, you can scan this QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code on the screen. I'll give you 1 second to get that QR code. And now I'm going to change over to the Mentimeter. There we go. All right. Let me see. Can you all see the Mentimeter? It should still be on the, I wasn't sure if I was sharing my screen or not.
Yep, we see it still says, how would you
Okay,
define trauma? So the previous question.
perfect. All right, on to our next question. What takes you outside of your window of tolerance, and what brings you back inside of it? So take a moment to think and reflect. Again, if you want to use the chat instead, go for it. Something really wild happening, seismic shifting, right? What brings me back is the space outside of the environment or time away to reset. Change in my routine, not enough sleep, higher than average stress, right? So this person who responded is pointing out that we have a certain ability to cope. We have the ability to cope with a certain amount of stress, right? But when the stress grows too big, we don't really have that great ability to cope anymore. And what defines manageable stress versus too big of stress can be different for each person. Lots of noise and stimulation and change can take me outside. Just like too much going on around us physically. I definitely get a bit overstimulated by that, and that can take me outside of my window of tolerance too. When I'm too busy and don't have time to rest, and what brings me back inside is rest. Time in nature and breathing take me back inside, definitely. My therapist has been really into, we both are big gardeners. And we talk a lot about how just getting our hands into dirt, how being out in green spaces is such an incredible reset for our human body. It's like, sometimes I'm like, I don't even need to see my therapist. I just need to go sit with the trees for a bit, take time away, time to reset. Lately, the state of the world is taking this person out of their window of tolerance. Absolutely. Um, I find myself taken out more frequently and severely. And what brings me back is good sleep and time to reflect. I think this is an interesting point that when there's a lot going on around us, it sounds like your window of tolerance is shrinking, right? So you're not able to regulate as easily, or the things that worked to help you keep you in your previous wider window of tolerance suddenly aren't as effective. And that is so real. When an overload of stress with work or school, not enough rest, not eating or sleeping enough, connecting with others enough, and coming up against big stressors in that state. Eating, sleeping, connecting, meditating brings them back in. Surprise stress or accidents and situations, stepping outside of the normal routine, more time for me, being overwhelmed or stressed takes me outside of my window of tolerance, but something that brings me back in is reading and rest. I'm hearing so much about rest here, and I think that is so real. Because what we do when we rest is we take time to regulate. We take time to, as many people are saying, step away from the stressors. And that's what we need oftentimes, just to reset. Spending time alone to recharge or outdoors in nature, resting, taking a walk, stretching, or exercising, journaling. I'm going to turn back to our chat real quick. Personal failures can bring this person back outside of their window of tolerance, but their faith aligns them back. When they get outside, they're tired or brings them when they're outside, excuse me, being tired takes them outside of their window of tolerance. Relaxing with music brings them back inside. Too many events and overscheduling myself and not enough time to regroup. When I'm not able to create artistically or when someone I love or a pet is suffering or struggling. Absolutely. And this would be our final one I'll read. Work overload when not sleeping well. I have a difficult time balancing and prioritizing when too piled up. This is so real, and I'm seeing so many similarities among y'all and a lot of things that I relate to. I hope you heard or saw some things on here that you relate to. I think it's really important to remember that we all have our own windows of tolerances, just like the people we serve. And a lot of the things that y'all shared here are probably a lot of the same things that bring them outside of their window of tolerance. So when we are not our best, when we are short with a colleague, or we get really upset over something that doesn't seem like it would normally upset us in that way, we might see those similar, or we might be able to track it back to, oh, I haven't slept enough. I haven't eaten well today. I'm experiencing stress from the greater world or things in my community. When we see those same emotions coming out of someone whom we're serving or one of our neighbors, hopefully we can take a moment and think, oh, maybe they're experiencing a lot of stress in their life. Maybe they're feeling really tired. Maybe they haven't had a time to reset or they're feeling really stressed. Because we all have windows of tolerances, and how big or small they are can change. So I want to point out here, and hopefully you're starting to kind of get this idea, but like, why take a trauma-informed approach, right? Like, why make accommodations for just a few people? Well, this is a prime example of the curb cut effect, and this was a term coined by policy expert Angela Blackwell. The curb cut effect describes how addressing or making accommodations for the disadvantages or exclusions experienced by one group of people actually creates an environment that's better for everybody. And this graphic shows how a curb cut, this graphic exemplifies that point with how sidewalk ramps or curb cuts were designed for people who use wheelchairs. But pretty quickly, people also realize that if you're pushing a stroller or a cart or walking a bicycle or wheeling luggage or just have limited no mobility and stepping up onto a sidewalk is difficult, everyone actually benefits from these curb cuts. So by implementing a trauma-informed approach and by having an understanding of trauma, we don't need to ask people if they have trauma or what their adversity is. And in fact, we probably shouldn't, but we can just assume that people have experienced difficult things in their lives. I think almost all of us have experienced difficult things in our lives. And when we see people behaving in a way that is difficult or reaching for the more unhealthy foods as opposed to the fresh produce we're offering, right? We can think back to maybe they're just operating outside of their window of tolerance and they just need a bit of regulation. They just need a moment of rest. They just need time to reset away from the stressors. Because I think we can all relate to that. When we think about trauma-informed nutrition security, it can still feel a little broad and a little expansive and very, very theoretical. So I like to break it down into these questions. What can we do in our work to reduce stigma, shame, confusion, and tension? What can we do to promote confidence, dignity, and joy? What can we do to inspire a compassionate and flexible relationship to our bodies, each other, and our material lives, like food? And how can we foster other protective and healing practices? If we keep these questions at the forefront of our brain, they can help us respond with compassion and connection when working with our neighbors and within our programs. So, with that, I am going to turn it over to Leah to talk about taking care of ourselves.
Thank you, Colby. That was actually a great segue. I mean, obviously planned, but still flows really well into our next section because now we've taken some time to, like I said, we're not really talking specific principles today. We're not getting into the details of a trauma-informed approach. We're trying to lay a foundation and some groundwork that gives us the essence of what this approach really is. Um, the most important things are taking that time to understand, okay, what are some signs of adversity and stress in my community or in myself? And then how can I start to build that understanding of the space that I'm creating, the programs that I'm offering? What are they doing to help mitigate some of that stress, right? So when thinking about how to start taking this approach and applying it towards programming, which we did through the nutrition pantry program, it's really integrated throughout that. But even more than that, how can we really promote this idea of positive relationships in and outside of a food distribution space, of this trauma informed approach, right? Well, I think a great place to start is really just with ourselves because we have a lot of control over that. So remember this foundation of a TI approach. It's really about human connection. Make sure you keep that in mind. It's about authentic relationships and human connection. So a great start is really to think about yourself. I'm going to take us through 3 different tools, and these tools are attunement, self regulation, and reframing. Now, I've bucketed attunement and self regulation together because they are similar, but there's some distinctions between the two of them, and they're important to understand those distinctions. So, we have attunement, which is being aware of our emotional state. Okay, so that's kind of that ability to, oops, I think I went too far actually. Okay, yep. There we go. Attunement. Okay, attunement is being aware of our emotional state, and self-regulation is the ability to manage our emotional responses. Um, so one good example of attunement, which we like to do at the beginning of a lot of trainings, is have people, kind of answer like, "Hey, maybe there's a chart with a bunch of silly cat faces or smileys on it," and just having people reflect, like, where am I right now in that chart? You also are seeing this more often incorporated into healthcare spaces, um, or even food security spaces. A lot of our partners now will have that poster up on the wall so that staff or volunteers can kind of go around in a circle and say, like, this is where I'm at today. So that attunement is really just kind of bringing that awareness to your own emotional state. And then that regulation piece is, how am I able to manage my different emotional responses? So generally, we think of regulated as, yeah, I can kind of manage the emotional responses, both positive and challenging. Dysregulated is being less able to manage those emotional responses. So that's some of the terminology we'll be using throughout this section. So something interesting to reflect on is, why does this have anything to do with trauma informed care, or the programming that we're offering? Well, think about it this way. Dysregulated people are going to have a harder time helping and supporting and showing up for others. So, if our goal within a food distribution space is to create safety and trust and transparency, we really do need to try and make an effort to show up well regulated and attuned as well. Because when we are regulated and attuned, we're better able to help others. We're better able to build those strong relationships within our community. And that's really a bedrock of success in the nutrition pantry program and in the spaces that you're creating as well, right? Having that strong community, understanding your community, building relationships with them. And we see that if we're able to bring that kind of regulated, attuned self, it helps us connect with others. And then it becomes a little bit like a ripple, a pebble that's dropped into a pond, and the ripples then travel outwards, because then we actually see, oh, this is creating a more healed community through better, more connected programming, right? Um, so remember, our task here is to, we want these healing communities. We want these great positive environments. But really, at the center of that, it always comes back to the individual person. And in a lot of cases, that's going to be you, right, as the staff or volunteer. So you are sometimes that pebble. That's the initial pebble that drops into the pond, and the ripple can really extend far into your community as well. Now, it's always easier said than done sometimes when it comes to, like, yeah, show up well regulated, show up attuned, take care of yourself. This is oftentimes a stressful environment, right? I've been a food banker and working in food security myself for many years now. So I can understand some of these stresses. Oftentimes, we see folks who are in kind of this helping industry suffer from things like compassion fatigue. That can really show up if you're feeling or seeing in staff or volunteers kind of a change in demeanor, a numbness, and a little bit of an indifference. Um, Vicarious trauma, That's often from overly identifying with a neighbor's trauma. So when you're hearing a lot of these adverse experiences, stressful stories, sad stories connected to your community, you can actually start to take that on and overly identify with it. And it's quite harmful for the person who is kind of internalizing all of that within themselves. Moral injury is interesting. I think we oftentimes see it in a healthcare setting, but I would argue you see it in a food insecurity in a social service setting as well. And that's really where the system that you're in can impede on your moral responsibility for, care. So it might feel like I know the right thing to do. I know what this person needs, but the constraints that I'm under make it nearly impossible for me to help them access those things that they need. Um, we've oftentimes seen that, especially if you're serving an especially vulnerable population. Um, Workplace culture and dynamics, or volunteer place culture and dynamics, that can sometimes be toxic. And then just recognizing that burnout is very real. These are risks, these aren't guarantees, but self-regulation and attunement are particularly important for us who are at risk of experiencing some of these things. So self-attunement and awareness, it can just begin with a simple checking in. Check in with yourself, ask yourself questions like, okay, how am I feeling in my body right now? What are the thoughts that are in my head? Are they racing through my head right now? Do I feel really present in my current moment? And what is my current emotional state? So, some easy steps that you can take to start to attune to, when you're going into that in-person meeting. If you're an implementer, maybe you're reaching out to new community contacts, or if you're already working at a site, who you're chatting with the neighbor or volunteer, and you're like, I kind of need to like check in with myself in this moment. You can do that very briefly. Remember breathing. So, kind of like taking awareness of that breath, taking a moment to control your breath a little bit, a couple deep breaths in and fully out. Presence and awareness. Um, it's so hard to stay aware and present in the moment you're in. I don't know if anyone here has any sort of meditation or mindfulness practices, but if you have ever tried to just quietly count to 10 slowly in your head without thinking of anything else but that number, I mean, I will be on 4 and I'll be like, wait a second. I got my mind, it just always goes in circles. Yes, Sarah, we love box breathing. We use that a lot as well. Um, so it's really hard to do. This isn't easy stuff here, but just even bringing that awareness of, oof, I was really kind of like my mind was floating away there. Let me just kind of recenter to where I'm at right now, and grounding. And let's actually, so we're not going to do box breathing right now, but we have something that might be a little bit different for you, Sarah, potentially, which is stop. I like this one because it's so easy to remember this acronym, right? To say like, I need to stop in this moment. And what does that mean here? Let's practice it together. So the first thing is S, and that is just, that's kind of noticing, right? It's that presence thing. So am I sitting? Am I standing? And let me just kind of notice where I'm at, right? So you feel your body in that position. That's very grounding. Feel my feet on the floor, feel my, bottom in the chair, whatever it is. T, take a breath. Feel that air very purposely in through the nose, out through the mouth. Box breathing, for anyone who's not familiar, is kind of that breath focused breathing. So you could go in for a count of 4, pause for a count of 4, out for a count of 4, pause for a count of 4, and that's kind of the box part of it, is you keep going around in that way. Oh, observe. So this is again grounding me right in this moment. You can count colors. I love to do that. Just kind of look around. Actually notice like, okay, like for me, I'm so lucky. I look out my window, I can see palm trees on the street. I see the blue sky and clouds, just kind of looking around, observing your surroundings. Thinking of all your different senses. Do I smell anything? Do I hear anything? And then the last one is presence. So again, this one's kind of interesting, but it brings us back to sort of like that presence of where our body is. It really grounds us. Where am I in this room in relation to other things? Maybe in relation to coworkers or objects in the room. That's bringing a lot of grounding and awareness. So remember, if you need to just briefly attune and regulate, this stop technique is a really nice, simple one to incorporate. So we're talking self-attunement, and that really, or sorry, self-regulation and attunement, and that really goes hand in hand with mindfulness and implicit bias. And I think this is really important to talk about since we're in such diverse spaces oftentimes when we're in these food distribution settings. So just some, again, foundation setting here. So implicit bias is an unconscious attitude or perception that is often negative about a person or a group of people. Our brains constantly and automatically want to categorize people and associate them with specific qualities. This is again part of that very ancient base part of our brain. It's being human. It's done as a way to protect, but it can also lead us down a path that we don't want to go down because we don't even realize we're going down that path. That's the trouble and the trickiness of implicit bias. Mindfulness can help disrupt that knee-jerk reaction. So mindfulness is, let me get my definition up for you. This is the awareness of what is happening in the present moment. This is a really powerful tool for developing self-awareness and cultural humility that's really needed to address our biases, address our blind spots. It is a very important practice. It allows us to develop awareness about what we're bringing into a space or an interaction so we can practice better attunement, right? Better recognition of the state we're in and the mind state and the physical state we're in. Overall, mindfulness helps us become less reactive, more responsive, less judgmental of ourselves and others as well. If you've not taken one of the implicit bias tests that Harvard offers online, it's really interesting to see. You might think like, and it's interesting, you can choose different categories. And so I actually encourage you to choose categories that you're either regularly confronted with through, maybe your work or volunteer work, or things that you would assume, I don't have bias about that. I really don't think I do, right? So kind of take the test and check it out and see, you might be a little bit surprised. Cultural humility. So another tool for combating implicit bias is really practicing cultural humility. And again, boy, can this be such an important tool in a food security space where you're often around so many different cultures, languages, heritages, foodways, etc. Right? And cultural humility is very simple. It's the art of being open to learning about other cultures and really being respectful of others' belief and values. So all it requires is some self-reflection, this mindset adjustment, and this kind of like, I'm going to bring a general curiosity and openness, letting go of assumptions. So you have to be aware of what your assumptions are in order to let go of them, which is again why that implicit bias piece is so important. And asking, and not just asking, but really listening. So when we practice cultural humility, we start with a real examination of our own beliefs and cultural identities and assumptions. We have to recognize when there are power dynamics or imbalances in play. And then bringing again that curious, kind of compassionate approach that helps us approach things with like I'm just curious about this. I want to learn, and letting go of assumptions. That's really key. So kind of like if you want to think about what cultural humility is in a nutshell, I would say it's bringing that curiosity and openness about others while also trying to be really aware of assumptions and letting them go. So we've talked attunement and self-regulation. Let's move into our last tool for today, which is reframing. So reframing is really interesting. It helps us understand trauma and adversity because it helps us better understand difficult behaviors and approach them with, again, more compassion and kind of like that same mindset of I want to be aware of my assumptions and I want to bring in a more compassionate and open mindset. That really sets us up for ultimately a better response to behaviors. And especially, I'll say, what we might originally call difficult or challenging behaviors. And I will put that in quotes and we'll kind of reflect on that word in and of itself at the end. So, what is reframing? It's really helpful to have gone through kind of that attunement and self regulation piece before diving into reframing, because you really do bring both the awareness of your own state as well as curiosity to come into a reframing. So, reframing is a method used to change how we approach a situation and to really examine our actions and our behaviors from a different perspective. It's a really good approach to adopt in your programs. It is used in food distribution settings all the time and in work settings and life settings. We're always reframing, or we can always reframe. And the best part is, it really is, again, an internal tool. So it's kind of once more starting with yourself. So when we reframe something like a difficult, challenging interaction with a coworker, a neighbor, a volunteer, the first step of the process is to pause. Take that moment to very purposefully and consciously try and stop judgments and assumptions that are automatically coming to mind. We just learned how our mind is constantly trying to categorize and put people and actions into buckets. And we want to do that because our mind's trying to say, that means X, Y, Z about that person. But we have to become aware of those assumptions and biases so that we can just pause them. Then what you do is you get curious. So you think like, gosh, was I making an automatic assumption just then? Was I, bringing some sort of worldview that's really coloring this situation? So you kind of examine and get really curious about your own thoughts and assumptions and biases as well. And then you think, well, gosh, what else could be going on in this situation? What could be another explanation for my behavior, someone else's behavior? What could be happening in this situation? So it's all about approaching our own thought process with a little bit more awareness, and then using curiosity and compassion as a first response rather than judgment and assumption and shame as well. So let's practice this together. We're actually going to practice a few different reframing scenarios, but here's like a very common scenario. I guarantee you multiple folks in this room have come across this if you've worked at a food distribution in the past. So say you are volunteering or running or whatever, right? Put yourself in a position where you're working at a food distribution. A neighbor coming through to access services comes up and is driving a really nice luxury SUV, right? Like they have that luxury Mercedes-Benz SUV. What if someone next to you, another volunteer staff member says, or even you, right? If we're being honest, says or thinks something like, that car is nicer than mine. I don't understand why this person's here. They obviously don't need this service. So there were a lot of assumptions being made there. The biggest one is that this person doesn't need this service because of the car they're driving. So how could you help someone reframe this situation? Unmute, put it in the chat. What else could be going on? What could you offer as an alternative explanation here? Thank you, Christopher. Christopher's saying, everyone needs assistance at some point in their life. Yeah, so you're trying to say, let's not assume we know what's going on with this person. Anyone else want to offer, we don't know the whole story? Yeah, maybe they borrowed someone's car.
Or maybe the debt to income ratio is really high and their payment is $600 a month and they can't afford it. I don't know, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. And maybe they could have afforded it until last month when, the income dropped all of a sudden, right? We're not here to make assumptions about how people spend their money or what values they have around buying, right? But that's absolutely the truth and could be the case. They could be picking up for someone else. It could be a gift. Yeah, maybe they just got laid off. We live in California, so we work a lot in California. Colby's up in the Bay Area, you know, near Silicon Valley, and one of our big contacts up there was like, you would be surprised the amount of Teslas that come through our food distributions, you know, and a lot of times we hear that someone's actually sleeping in the back of one. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, they, you know, exactly. House rich, cash poor, the car's borrow, it's a loaner, whatever. These are all excellent, excellent, excellent reframes of that situation. And yes, these are all just as likely, or I would argue more likely than someone being, you know, coming unnecessarily to a food distribution so they can take advantage, right? Maybe they just lost that job. They don't have savings. Maybe they're picking up for someone else. That happens a lot. They borrowed the car. They won the car. It was a gift from a family member. Ultimately, the point isn't to get to the bottom of this. It's to um, really pause judgments and assumptions and recognize how much they color our views of how we see the world and how we tell ourselves stories about not just ourselves, but our community as well. And recognizing that, you know, someone is coming to you for a service. And so you want to provide the highest quality service to every single patron who comes through your distribution. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, reminding folks it's not our job to get to the bottom of why someone's visiting if they really need our help. And they do because they're there, right? Okay, so that is a situation that many of us have probably actually seen before, but there are some other common situations that we often have to reframe in these food distribution settings. So let's look at them together. Food hoarding. Now, that is oftentimes when someone's taking too much home with them, right? So maybe you have set limits on food, and then people are actually taking more than that allotted amount. They have to be told, like reminded of the rules, for example. Or I've seen this before when I was working at a food bank. Someone comes through the distribution, pops open the back of their trunk or their car, and you see like, oh wow, it looks like they just went through another food distribution somewhere else. They're kind of making the rounds, right? And hoarding, remember, is when someone is getting more food than they can probably eat. So it's not just like I have a huge family and we don't get enough here. Food hoarding is like I'm probably gonna not be able to eat all of this perishable food before it goes bad, but I still have that biological need and that urge to stock up. So kind of hint, hint there. Some other behaviors, just kind of showing aggression, you know, maybe in line, someone who seems agitated and irritated. What might be going on there? How could we reframe that? How about neighbors who are actually kind of passing on all of your beautiful, healthy produce and instead opting in for the breads and the processed foods and the chips and the cookies that might be available, right? So that's really easy to label as like they have poor willpower, you know, they don't care about their health. What else could be going on there? Why someone would be choosing that food over fresh produce? How about someone who does appear to be frustrated over the items they're receiving? So, you know, kind of like, oh, I don't use this, I don't like this, you know, that might kind of automatically rub you the wrong way. Well, why? And what else could be going on there? And then kind of just people with generally a bad attitude. So there's a lot here. Let's pop on the chat box or unmute. I love when y'all unmute and share your thoughts as well. You can choose any of these behaviors. How might you reframe some of these other behaviors that we have listed here? Okay, so Chong Min said food hoarding. So they practice mutual aid and redistribute to others in their neighborhood. Yeah, maybe you're assuming that they're just grabbing way more food than they need because, you know, you don't haven't asked before or don't know what's going on with them, but they actually are giving it out to others.
Folks might,
Go ahead.
sorry. Folks might not know how to use the fresh produce or anything. Maybe they've never seen it or eaten it before. So it's easier to grab a bag of chips or sweets or nothing or hoard something else.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Sarah. Absolutely. Who else was going to share just then? Was it Samira? No. Okay, I heard someone else.
It was me, Joanna.
Oh,
Hi.
go ahead, Joanna.
So I was going to say what Sarah shared, sometimes it's just not knowing how to use other foods or going with what's familiar. It's also, we don't know what their time looks like. Do they have the time to prepare certain things? That was one of the things that's come up with us a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, me being a still, I think of, I'm like, I have like an 18-month-old, but I'm like, it's still new-ish mom. Um, Gosh, your time, like you thought you didn't have time before. The more kids you add, the more obligations you have, the longer you're taking to commute, travel, work, the less time you have to do things. And something I think is interesting and important to remember is that there's a level of uncertainty in every piece of fresh produce, right? Whether you're uncertain about how to cook something because you didn't grow up eating it or it's unfamiliar to you, or just truly even something that your family likes, like a berry, right? Like a blueberry. They taste great at certain times of year. And sometimes you get them in their mealy or their tart, right? So there's inconsistency in fresh produce because that's the nature of it. And there is complete consistency in processed foods because that is the nature of that. A chip, a cookie, whatever, it tastes the exact same every single time. So there's absolute safety in knowing I or my family will eat this. And you don't always know that with fresh produce. Let's see what else is happening here in the chat box. Someone who's showing aggression in line could be feeling anxious. They've waited for a long time. This comes up a lot. People actually come to your distribution hungry, and I have worked with a lot of sites where they are offering snacks, snacks, water, hydration for people who are waiting in line or stopping by, something that someone can grab and go or have in the moment as well, because the hanger is definitely real. And a snack, yes, exactly. Okay, Miko is already doing that. I love to hear that. Okay, go ahead, Kara. I see your hand raised.
I just wanted to bring up that sometimes, especially with older adults, like a habit has been like born and maintained and sustained for years and years. And like truthfully, when you're handing out food, that's not really something that's within your control to like break this like 20, 30-year long habit of like, I don't like green grapes. So I think it's important to not take that to heart and be like, it's because they don't like my shirt. They think I'm this. Like not taking it, within your personal skin. Like letting it be just a chip off the shoulder and like I will offer like an example like, well, have you tried these grapes before? Like you never know. I try to like keep it really lighthearted, and if the response is still just no, never, then that it is what it is, and there's going to be other options or there's going to be a next time. So I'm just like, oh, come next time because we might change the food sample we're giving. Just offering, hey, there will be another time for you to try again.
That's a great, I love that philosophy, Kara, of not feeling a personal attack because of someone's preferences or exactly the way they were raised. These neural pathways in our head they're deep grooves and they're hard to change sometimes. So thinking in your head, reframing it as it's not going to always be a no. It could just be a not this time, but maybe I'll get them next time. I love that. Deborah, I see your hand raised as well.
Yes, I was just looking at the one that says neighbor bad attitude. And I'm just going to speak to something that happens sometimes is that when you are restructuring and putting in new guidelines, sometimes people get very frustrated with that. But what happens with that is because they don't understand the process. So my thing to reframe is like, I know this is new, it's just new, and it's just we're just trying to make sure everyone gets something, because it's not a whole lot. And I know it feels funny, and we did it another way, but we just haven't, just to make sure everyone gets something. We try to make sure we have structure in place to make sure everyone's fed. So that's how I just reframe it. Like, it's just it's just something we're not trying to, be mean or anything. We just want to make sure that your family's fed, and so is another family behind you is fed.
I love that, Deborah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, we didn't go into our 6 trauma-informed principles, but if we did, or if you want to in another training or in your own study, or maybe y'all are already familiar with some of these, but the first 2 principles are there's safety and there's trust and transparency. And I really think of them again as kind of like our foundational trauma-informed principles, because you would be surprised how unsafe change can make people feel. And just like Deborah said, it could be a change in the process, a change in what's available. That's a change. And change is hard. And if someone's already has that small window of tolerance or is in a state of hypo or hyper arousal, and then you throw in something different, something new and unexpected, they might have their own assumptions they're making about everything's going to change here. I'm not going to be able to get what I need, right? That's what it ultimately comes down to. So I think being transparent, like Deborah's saying, like Sarah's saying, really leaning on the relationships you've built with folks and reassuring people that their needs, their ultimate needs, their concerns are heard, their needs are going to be met, even if the process is different. That's a really important approach to take as well. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to keep it moving. I've loved this conversation. Thank you all so much for being so willing to participate in it. And I appreciate all of your perspectives here. So yeah, basically just going to recap a lot of things that you've already said. So someone who takes more food than they can eat might be in that feast and famine cycle. They're probably just seeking protection and safety. Someone who's acting aggressive or frustrated or irritated, just remember that's not someone who's mad at you personally. You can say, oh, I think this person is having a really hard time regulating and managing their emotions today. They're probably outside of their window of tolerance. Or maybe they're just trying to assert some authority and autonomy and seeking choice in a world where their options are probably limited in a lot of different spaces, right? Not just in your food distribution space. So aggression and defensiveness, those are common emotions and reactions for when someone's outside of their window of tolerance, which is again why I want to go back to the challenging behaviors, bad attitude. Are these actually not bad and challenging behaviors, but are these just what we would expect to see in a person who is outside of their window of tolerance, right? We know that there are physical, emotional, and biological changes happening in people when they are operating outside of that space. So give people some of that space and grace of saying, they're not mad at me, and I understand where this behavior is coming from, and I'm not going to take it personally. Seeking predictability, as I said, fruits and veggies can be intimidating. You don't know how to cut them, how to cook them. You don't know if your kids are going to like them. You don't know what the flavor profile is going to be. But processed foods always taste the same. So there's just predictability there. So reframing, y'all are already really, really good at it, which I love. But it is really, really helpful to have these conversations with staff and volunteers because these are behaviors that are really common. And as we've discussed, they are understandable behaviors. In fact, we expect to see them. That's why we see them so often. So how we approach these behaviors is, I think, the biggest thing that we have control over. Okay, so I want to end with a reflection on some well-intended tensions. And then we had such a great discussion there. I don't think that we're going to go into any breakout rooms because this group has been so conversational, which I appreciate. So we'll have an opportunity, I think, for people to share once more, and then we'll close out for today because we're almost done. So reframing can really help us address not just things that we're seeing in others, but things that we may feel in ourselves because of the line of work we're in. And I call these our well-intended tensions, because the reality of working in food security or nutrition is that there's a lot of push and pull. You're part of a really big system, which we're not going to go into, but that has its own challenges, right? So these are just things that we have heard of, again, as common, kind of to be expected in some senses, tensions that people have felt in these roles. And sometimes reframing or looking at some of these through that trauma-informed lens can just be a helpful starting point. We're not going to come up with solutions to these tensions, but we do want to acknowledge that they're there and be really transparent about that. Things like rules and restrictions, against the tension of, having a rule and restriction in place because you want there to be a level of order and equality or equity and fairness as well. It doesn't feel good to enforce rules and restrictions. Sometimes you have to be the bad guy or feel like the bad guy. Sometimes people don't react well to feeling restricted or in structure, but you want to make sure that everyone has enough. So that is a tension that a lot of spaces and programs have to balance. Donation dumping. So that's the idea that sometimes you might feel that what we're receiving from retail rescue or from food banks is not the highest quality resource, or sometimes food banks feel that themselves. But you have the tension of, well, nothing should go to waste. If we don't take it, then that's, food that's going to go to a landfill. So kind of conservation of natural resources, and also just knowing that there is so much scarcity, and the funding is getting less and less. The food people are getting oftentimes is getting less and less. So there's a tension there. This idea of, I want the highest quality, freshest food for my community, but I don't want anything to go to waste. Efficient use of time and resources versus time you spend listening. As we've seen from this, this call, even today, this training where we have folks who are jumping in and out, and I got to handle this situation and that. You're really busy people. This is a food distribution is a really, really busy space. If you're going to be just supporting folks at a food distribution and you're just in, nutrition education or, kind of more of the administrative level, that can still be really challenging. So you have to balance, I want to listen and connect, but I have to be efficient with my time and resources. And sometimes that comes out as, how do I even set up this distribution, right? Is it a shop style model? Is it a drive-through space? What are the pros and cons of each? Because there's not always one clear path there. And there's not always one best approach. Accountability to funders versus accountability to communities. Sometimes people don't want to fund what a community actually needs. Maybe they want to fund what they think a community needs. And so that, as a service provider, can feel like a real tension for you, right? Because you might see or have a clearer idea of, or be in conversation with folks who tell you what their real needs are, and you see a gap there between the funding and the actual programming, right? There's some really interesting trauma-informed, community-centered funding models that people are moving towards, which is great, and then research models as well, but it's still a gap. Neighbor health versus neighbor choices. So that tension of, I want people to have the ability to choose whatever they want, but I do want them to choose the healthy stuff, right? So how do you encourage that? And when we have a lot of ways through the nutrition pantry program that we have structured where we can set up spaces that encourage health, while still allowing for choice. And then finally, or actually I think I have two more, charity versus structural improvements. There's a tension between the services that you're offering and understanding that they are just a small piece and a reflection of major, major structural issues in this country that are leaving folks in poverty and without living wages, and coming back to a food distribution year over year over year. When these were originally developed, food banking was created as a measure to be a stopgap. And then finally, equality and equity. So feeling like I want folks to have what they need versus the tension of, do people just all get like that equal, everyone gets the same amount, or do you base it on family size, right? And trying to move towards more of a equity model. So these are just some tensions that you may feel. You might feel others, you might feel all of these, none of these. We're almost at the end of time, so I won't leave a ton of time for reflection on this, except just say, you'll have access to these slides if you kind of want to. They can be sometimes interesting talking points as a team to really think about where are our well-intended tensions and how do we tackle them. Okay, so with that, I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass it over to Colby, who's going to close us out with just a little bit of a wrap up and preview of what's to come.
So this has been a lot, and I really appreciate y'all sticking with us today. You've been such a great group. Your reflections, your insights have been really valuable. So as a reminder of what we went through today, because it was a lot. Remember, we started way back when, almost 2 hours ago, with the meaning of food and life and how we all have different relationships with food that show up differently in our lives. We talked about trauma and adversity and stress and the importance of protective factors and positive experiences and the 3 E's. Remember, there's the stressful event, there's the way someone experiences it, and then there's the effect it has. We can use our distributions as protective factors. And what else could be going on with a difficult behavior? Coming up, we're going to be moving into more of our programmatic aspects of of the training here for this program. So you'll be introduced to our 6 focus areas, which you're gonna dive into in your self-paced work, and then we're gonna expand a lot upon them in our live sessions. And ultimately in session 3, we'll get to do a case study where you get to put all of this great information and resources together and into practice. Our next training will be on November 4th, so we'll see you early next month, same time. Again, you'll join through the Talent LMS links. If you haven't been able to get on there, please send us an email because there is a possibility that you might not get marked as attended, and we want to make sure that all of y'all get credit for showing up. If you join through Talent LMS, you will definitely get marked as attended. Please complete section 2 of the online self-paced work prior to the next section or session. That will set us up for great conversations. And we're going to do a lot of like programmatic paperwork in that one. So having information ahead of time about that will make it a bit less of a cognitive overload. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us at npp@leaspantry.org. With that, Christopher, I see your hand is up, but everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. You are free to go. If anyone else has questions, please stay on and we will be happy to answer them. So thank you for joining us. It's been truly a pleasure getting to know you all, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.